The House Taxation meeting will come to order, please. I'd like to remind everyone, I'll probably quit this spiel by the second week, but remind everyone to silence their cell phones and laptops and any other electronic devices, please. Looks like we have several representatives attending virtually, so we will keep an eye on the screen and try to make sure we get any questions. Just wave your hand if we aren't acknowledging you, and we'll try to make sure we don't miss someone on the screen. Sorry, we've got a little bit of feedback there. I'm not sure if anybody needs to mute their microphone possibly, or maybe that's even coming through my microphone. The first item of business will be requests for introduction of bills. Do we have any requests? Representative Gardner first.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to introduce a bill. It's providing a refundable food sales tax credit. It's I'm introducing it on behalf of the Governor's Council on Tax Reform, and the RS number is 0401.
Thank you, Representative. Are there any questions? Seeing none, is there any objection to the introduction of the bill? Seeing none, the bill is introduced. Thank you, Representative. Bill introduction from the audience.
Check. Okay, thank you. Good afternoon, Chairperson Smith and members of the committee. My name is Steve Green, and on behalf of the Cerebral Palsy Research Foundation of Kansas, I'd like to introduce RS Revisor Bill 0295, which is a technical fix to the sales exemption for educational institutions.
Since this is an audience bill, I would ask Representative Mason to make a motion on the introduction, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move that we accept the bill as submitted.
And a second by Representative Helgerson. Are there any questions about the introduction of the bill? Seeing none, any objection? Seeing none, the bill is introduced. Thank you. Any further introductions? Committee, if you are attending virtually, don't be afraid to make bill introductions as well. I think I see everybody on the screen, but I am not seeing any hands up or anything for bill introductions, so we will move on. Today's business is a presentation from Adam Siebers, our lead reviser from the Office of the Revisers. And he is going to be providing us first with an overview of the CORA, and for the committee. And some of you have probably already heard this, but we want to make sure we review it and everybody has a good understanding of that. And then we will move on to our next item. So Adam, if you can hear us, we will turn it over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Are you able to hear me okay?
Yes, we hear you loud and clear.
All right, very good. No, there have been some technical difficulties, so I want to make sure of that. Yes, I have, I believe, prepared for the committee a memo. Have you received that?
Yes, that was sent out via email, so the committee should all have that memo.
Okay, I'm going to pull it up here on the screen. Are you able to see it on the screen also?
Yes, we can see it good.
Okay, very good. I'm just going to go through this quickly. The memo is a little bit more in depth. I'm just going to glance over the important parts. This goes into some, finer detail than probably needed to know, especially for maybe newer members. Going to talking about the Kansas Open Meetings Act and the Kansas Open Records Act. I'll first start with the Kansas Open Meetings Act, commonly referred to as KOMA. Generally, this law is what requires government bodies to have sessions be available and open for the public to view. And for the legislator's purpose, it applies to most of the committees. There are certain select committees that have different rules, caucuses and other select committees can close. However, House Taxation, like most of the other kind of standing committees, they're subject to coma. So that's going to go over just the general rules here. What does coma basically require? It requires two things. It requires that meetings be open to the public and that notice of meetings be provided if requested. So generally, if there's going to be a violation of coma, it falls under one of two categories, either the first or the second. Under the second, the notice component, that is handled by the lead of the committee here, be the committee chair. The committee chair designates this ability, generally the committee assistant. Notice with the legislator is generally not an issue just because all of the procedures and policies that are in place provide for notice, the emails, the calendar and things like that. So the legislator is usually on pretty good standing when it comes to the notice component. It's one of the meetings that be open to the public. Most of the members may want to kind of be aware of. The nice thing about the House Tax Committee is it's a large committee. So to some extent, the concerns are a little bit diminished, but I'll go through them anyway. When we're deciding what a meeting is, it kind of boils down to the statutory definition and kind of other guidance generally issued by the AG. A meeting generally means any gathering or assembly via any method of communication. This includes electronic communication. And this can occur at any location, not just at the Capitol. And here's kind of the main component that involves a majority of the voting members. And also for the purpose of engaging in a discussion about the business of the body. So in layman's terms, if every member of the House Tax Committee met and discussed the football game this weekend, we'd have no problem. If every member or a majority or half, more than half, met to discuss retailer sales tax, something like income tax, that's when the issue would arise because they'd be discussing the business of the body. Going on now, there's also something called serial communications, and this is the concern that you may not meet with the majority of the body, but however, one member goes to another member to discuss, try and generally persuade a certain number of people without getting everyone collectively together to either like vote or do some sort of action in a certain way. So just be aware that serial communications are also an issue if you're going, trying to evade the, not getting all in one group, but you're trying to go member by member to get something to discuss and possibly, persuade to vote a certain way. Lastly, interactive communications, generally email, and now kind of some of this newer technology that's out here is also kind of a concern. Me as a reviser, the reply all button when all legislators are on an email is always a very scary thing because you can inadvertently enter into a meeting without knowing it. That's why we are always warning against using the reply all button when all legislators are on an email, especially when any sort of business of the body is being discussed. Generally, if you're just putting out dates or times for meetings to take place, it's not really applicable as much during the session because we have set meeting times. That's not a concern. But if somebody sends something, then a discussion takes place through email. That's when a big concern is that there's a possible coma violation. So that is if there's anything to take away from this presentation here is probably to refrain from replying all when all members are on an email and discussing something that should come before the committee. And like I said, here's a couple of just common examples. Social events and travel are not meetings under coma if there's no business discussed. You can attend educational conventions and things like that as long as no meetings are discussed. However, avoid discussing anything, even if it's on electronically, email, Twitter, Facebook, where the majority of the members of the body get together or are part of, and that there could be a discussion going on. Lastly, on the giving notice, and I kind of touched on that, Generally, the notice is handled by the chairperson who delegates to committee staff. It's more along his responsibility, not kind of every other member's. There's some things about the agenda. The agenda just has to be posted. Again, that also kind of falls on the committee chairperson and the staff. I'll move now to Cora, just kind of keep things moving along. Cora for legislators, probably not as impactful as COMA, unless you are a committee chairperson, but I'll just make you aware of some of the requirements. Cora requires that for public agency records, and the term public agency is, of course, a defined term, they have to be made available, if requested, to the public. Generally, what this means is they have to, some sort of response under Cora has to be done within 3 days if you receive a written request for records. Most agencies have procedures. I believe most requests for the committee should go to like either committee secretary or the chairperson. I do want to make note that under Cora, individual legislator records are generally, they are not public records. So your individual records are not subject to Cora. No one can request them and get them from you. What I'm really talking about here is the committee records. Records of the committee would be subject to Cora. Again, those are generally requests are handled by the chairperson or the committee assistant. However, if any of you do receive a Cora request, please feel free to contact myself, a member of the revisor's office. It's probably always a good idea to respond to Cora requests, even if you're going to say you're not going to be providing the records, because Cora does require a 3-day response. It's really unclear what happens, if you don't respond, even though you're not liable. So it's better off if you just, we can help you draft a Cora response if someone happens to send you a Cora request, just to make sure everything is covered. Lastly, under the memo, it talks about the enforcement. There is some financial penalties that can be assessed if you've found to violate them. There's also the Attorney General and the District Attorney have authority to bring an action. This is in addition to a civil action brought by any private individual. And lastly, the Attorney General can enter into what are called consent orders. Generally, they require some sort of training if a violation is found. And with that, I'd be happy to, I went through that pretty quickly. If there's any questions, be happy to answer them at this time.
Yes, thank you, Adam. And I would like to make I don't know if it's really a question, but just make a statement. There is no time requirement on the notice, like 24 hours before the meeting.
That's correct. There is no time notice. It's always a reasonableness standard. I think, if you're going to have a couple of weeks before a meeting, the general premise is you got to give more time. The legislator acts on a little more of a condensed time frame. So generally, we try and issue notices. The staff, as soon as we know. So there is no hard set rule on notice requirements of when they have to be done. It's just as long as it's reasonable. So you don't want to hold on to, if you're going to have a meeting tomorrow or a week from now, you don't want to wait till the day before to issue the notice if you know it's going to be then. That's about the only advice I can give on that.
And the reason I was mentioning that is for our newer members, occasionally we will have an announcement in the chamber that there is a meeting at the rail, and that is the rail that goes around the rotunda. And that is typically for a quick meeting to introduce a bill or to take care of some short business. But that is a very brief notice, but it does comply.
And if I may step in there, usually we also do have the committee secretary send out the emails to everyone on the list at that point too.
Representative Mason.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Adam, there's kind of a gray area when it comes to meetings, almost spontaneous meetings with texting and emails and things like that. Can you address that? And probably one of the best safeguards is if you're sending out a bulk email to a group of folks put their addresses all in a blind carbon copy. Could you address that?
Representative Mason, you're correct. That's usually my standard practice, to be honest with you. If I have sent out an email to all committee members, is to blind copy them. It's not the initial email that causes the problem. It's the response that causes the two-way dialogue, because that's what you have to have a violation or coma. So that I would agree that is the safest way to go about it. If you're going to be emailing, the safest way is to email probably Leah, the committee secretary, if they want to send things to the committee, and then she can then disperse them. But if you're going to be emailing other people or committee members about committee business, to blind copy them, so there's the risk of any sort of communication, inadvertent communication, is greatly diminished, because you can't hit a reply all if everything's been blind copied, because it just won't, it'll only respond back to the one person.
Committee, any further questions? I can't see anyone virtually right now, so is there anyone out there in the virtual world that has a question? Seeing none, we will conclude that piece. Thank you, Adam. And committee, we will continue on with our reviser, Adam Siebers, for a brief overview of the tax bills from the 2020 session that were left over, probably either got vetoed, passed the House, and never were taken up by the Senate, or perhaps some issues that passed through committee, and because our time got short, they never made it to the floor. So Adam, I will turn it back over to you for the next presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I also have a second memo that kind of goes through these bills. I'm going to start at the beginning and kind of just work my way through. There are not too many of them. The first bill I'm going to discuss is what was House Bill 2702. This bill passed both the House and the Senate, but was vetoed by the governor at the end of last session. In the bill, for newer members, you'll find a lot of these bills that make their way through. A lot of them have different component parts. So you'll see some of these component parts in other bills, and that's very common, especially in the tax realm. So sections 1 through 6 of this bill contain what was called the Kansas Taxpayer Protection Act. Excuse me. And what this did was it governed actions of paid tax preparers, kind of set a whole framework for requiring signatures by the paid tax return preparer. It required them to post their federal ID number. It also allowed for penalties and authorized the Secretary of Revenue to bring actions on any tax return preparer who engaged in prohibited conduct. Sections 7 through 9 of the bill. This is kind of an obsolete provision because it extended the time frame for filing state tax returns only for last year. So really that has wouldn't have no application at this point anyway. Sections 10 and 13 requires a new notice and hearing provision for property tax I said county here, but for essentially any taxing jurisdiction before they adopt and increase their property taxes. Essentially what this sections 10 and 13 do is they replace what is commonly known as the city and county tax lid. These sections would require that for any taxing subdivision who want to exceed what's called the revenue neutral rate, which is a defined term, and that is the rate of tax for the current tax year that would generate the same property tax revenue from the prior year using the current tax year's total assessed valuation. And what that does is essentially it gets at things are always changing property tax wise or values. So essentially if the taxing jurisdiction is going to try and bring in more money, they have to go through this process for their budgets. And what they have to do is they have to send out a notice and they have to hold a hearing before they can raise taxes that exceed this revenue neutral rate. There's these provisions about what is contained in the notice. You can see them listed here as 1 through 7. Generally, it's the revenue neutral rate itself, property tax revenue to fund the whole budget, the proposed rate, and basically compares, the current year or what's estimated versus the prior year is a lot of what it is. It all has to be contained in this notice, and this is for every taxing subdivision. They'll send out one notice, generally by the county clerk will send out one notice, and for every taxing subdivision the taxpayer is subject to, they'll have to include all this information. There's also a public hearing requirement. Has to be held on September 10th if the body is going to adopt, public body is going to adopt the budget that's as a higher amount. If a governing body fails to comply with these notice and hearing procedures, the governing body is required to refund any taxes collected above the revenue neutral rate to the taxpayers. Lastly, school districts are exempt from these requirements, and school districts don't have to undergo this process. Sections 11, 14, and 15 would have prohibited interest from accruing on 2019 unpaid taxes. It basically extended out and made them non-delinquent. Again, this really is obsolete provision since that was only for 1 year. Section 12 would have prohibited the increase in appraised valuation of real property as a result of normal repair, replacement, or maintenance of existing structures, equipment, or improvements on the property. What this bill did was it prevented any sort of a increased appraisal due to the normal repair, replacement, or maintenance of properties. Section 16 went along with that prior notice provision that replaced essentially this section would have sunset or discontinued the current city and county tax lid, which would then be replaced with that other notice and hearing provisions. And lastly, Section 17 would allow a county treasurer to establish a payment plan for delinquent or non-delinquent property taxes. There's another bill I have listed below that was, I think, where it originated from. This bill has been refiled this current year as House Bill 2003, and I believe this committee has a hearing on this bill next week. So moving on so that bill 2702, of course, passed both chambers, but was vetoed, so it never became law. Moving now to bills that passed the House chamber only, in addition to 2702, House Bill 2466, but that was just the Kansas Taxpayer Protection Act, which was in 2702. House Bill 2490 passed the House chamber, and this bill would have extended the corporate net operating loss carry forward from losses that occurred in tax year 2018 going forward. Essentially, it extended the NOL carry forward provisions of corporation from the current 10-year to a 20-year. However, there is a kind of a computation of, it has to be the lesser of either the Kansas net operating loss carryover or the 80% of Kansas taxable income computed without regard to the Kansas net operating loss deduction. So that bill did also pass the House chamber last year. And lastly, moving on to bills that were voted out of committee but never actually made it across the House floor. House Bill 2441, which would have expanded the current statute allowing for cities and counties, or cities and school districts, the ability to levy a property tax in order to finance a museum. House Bill 2538 would have increased the standard deduction from $3,000, $7,500 for married, and $5,500 for head of household to $4,000, $8,000, and $6,000. House Bill 2576 would have amended the date for when property tax bills are to be mailed from December 15th, and it would essentially have to be mailed by December 10th. So it required a 5-day earlier mailing. Again, 2607 would establish the payment plan. What was the same bill that was in the vetoed bill, and which is what we heard next week in 2003. House Bill 2657 requires marketplace facilitators to collect and remit taxes from sales made through the platform. And then lastly, House Bill 2726 extended the corporate tax return filing deadline extension to match federal income tax return for corporations. And with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Adam, committee questions. Representative Sanders.
Yes, so why did the governor veto the bill that was passed by both the House and the Senate?
Representative, I'll probably have to either defer to other members or the actual veto statement that can be provided to you.
Well, if there's somebody else who'd like to address that, that'd be fine.
Yes, Representative, typically when the governor vetoes a bill, she will issue a statement specifying exactly that. The bill that she vetoed was a conglomerate. It was a bundle of a lot of extra bills. That's why I think there were 17 different sections. Not all of it she disagreed with, if I remember right from her statement, but the city and county tax bill was one that had some issues that she noted in her veto statement. And I should probably be quiet and not say any more because I can't remember exactly what the veto statement read. Representative Highland.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. One down here, you have the facilitator. Would you explain what that is? I noticed it in the governor's budget proposal. She has facilitator, and I think it was $48 million from that. Can you explain that, please?
Sure, Representative. Internet sales is actually broken up into a few components, the common term internet sales. You have both out-of-state retailers and you have marketplace facilitators. What a marketplace facilitator is, it's essentially an organization or the server or the host that allows the sales to be transacted through its through it, but it doesn't actually own or does not actually make the sale. Commonly, Amazon is both a marketplace facilitator and a seller of its own goods. There's others. eBay is a marketplace facilitator most time where you have an independent seller and a buyer while the marketplace facilitator just facilitates the transaction. So that's what a marketplace facilitator is. Under current statutory framework, Kansas law only requires the seller to collect and remit sales tax. So there's no way the marketplace facilitator would ever be liable for any sales that are not its property for the collection and remittance of such tax.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Day.
I'm not sure. So is HB 2702 planning on, are we putting it back through again this year? Is that?
This is a review of all the bills from last year. I guarantee you 2702 in its exact form will probably not come through.
Okay, so I have a question about it, and I'm not sure if it'll come up, but Section 12, prohibiting the increase in appraised valuation of real property. So what would the increases in the appraised valuation be based on? If not, I understand the replacement or maintenance of regular items, but if not on improvements of the property.
Yes, and Representative, we'll probably get into the details of the exact bill if we get another bill introduced. I just wanted to give the committee an overview, kind of what happened at the end of last session, so we can really dive into those details later. Thank you. Any further questions, committee? Anyone in WebEx, any representatives that would like to ask a question? Seeing none. Adam, thank you very much for your thorough and in-depth review of both the Kansas Open Meetings and Open Records Act and also the bill review. Committee, that concludes our business for today. I do want to make notice, we are off next Monday for the holiday. We do have a meeting scheduled for Tuesday. We will be hearing from the Kansas Society of CPAs about some of the tax implications from the CARES Act funding. Now, if you're also a member of Commerce, It may be a very similar presentation, so I apologize, but I think that's good information that the committee needs to know. If there is no further business to come before the committee, thank you. We are adjourned.